Wrong range, sweetheart. Lieutenant Travis Boone laughed as he looked at the battered rifle case in the quiet woman's hands. Around him, officers, reporters, and elite snipers joined in, convinced Captain Evelyn Brooks was nothing more than an aging logistics officer who had wandered into the wrong place. What none of them knew was that her name had been erased from military records 12 years earlier, and the old rifle she carried had once belonged to a unit the Army officially denied ever existed. The laughter lasted exactly until the 17th sniper missed. Then General Richard Holloway asked, "Anyone still believes?" Falcon Ridge sat in the middle of western Arizona, surrounded by miles of dry mountains, endless rock formations, and enough empty desert to test weapons no civilian would ever see. Every gust of wind carried sand across the firing lanes, reminding every marksman that nature cared nothing about expensive optics or polished reputations. Today's event mattered. The Department of Defense had invited congressional observers, military instructors, and several private defense companies to evaluate Falcon Ridge as the future home of America's newest extreme long-range training center. Everything had to be perfect. Colonel Benjamin Ross reminded everyone of that before sunrise. "I don't want mistakes today," he said, walking along the firing line with both hands behind his back. "The cameras aren't here to record excuses. They're here to record excellence." "Yes, sir." 23 voices answered together, almost. One voice remained silent. Captain Evelyn Brooks continued unloading wooden ammunition crates from the back of an aging military pickup without ever looking toward the colonel. She lifted each crate carefully, checked the labels, and stacked them beside the supply tent. Private Noah Ellis hurried over. "Ma'am, I can grab those." Evelyn smiled politely. "I've got them. They're heavy. So am I." The answer was quiet enough that Noah almost missed it. He smiled. She didn't. She simply carried another crate toward the firing line. Lieutenant Travis Boone watched her approach. "There goes the ammo lady." Sergeant Cole Matthews laughed. "I heard she's been logistics for almost 10 years. Looks like it. What do you think that rifle case is?" "Probably a family heirloom." Several shooters laughed. Evelyn placed the last crate on the inspection table. She opened the lid. Rows of perfectly arranged match-grade cartridges reflected the morning sunlight. Without hesitation, she picked up 3 rounds. She frowned. Private Noah noticed. "Something wrong?" She rolled one cartridge between her fingers. "This lot shouldn't be mixed. You can tell?" She nodded slightly. "The weight's different." Noah blinked. "You weighed that?" "I listened." He stared. "What?" She tapped one cartridge softly against another. Tiny metallic clicks. Almost identical. Almost. She quietly separated 8 rounds into a second row. Lieutenant Boone leaned over the table. "What are you doing?" "Separating the lots. They're identical. They're labeled that way." "So?" "So labels make mistakes." Boone laughed. "Bullets don't. They do when people package them." The surrounding shooters grinned. Boone picked one cartridge from the second row. "This one?" "Yes." He tossed it back into the original box. "There. Problem solved." More laughter. Evelyn calmly picked it back out. "No," she placed it where it belonged. Boone folded his arms. "You really think you'll save the Army with bullet sorting?" She looked at him. "I think someone should." For just a moment, nobody laughed. Then Sergeant Matthews slapped Boone's shoulder. "She got you." The laughter returned. Colonel Ross noticed the crowd gathering. "What's happening over there?" Boone answered first. "Nothing, sir. The ammo officer thinks she found magic bullets." Ross walked over. He looked at the cartridges, then at Evelyn. "Captain Brooks." "Sir, your job?" "Logistics." "Then do logistics." "Yes, sir." She closed the crate. No argument, no complaint. Ross nodded once. "Good." As he walked away, Boone leaned closer. "You know," he tapped the old rifle case with one finger. "You should leave that thing in your truck. It belongs with me." "No." He smiled. "It belongs in a museum." The nearby recruits burst into laughter. One of them pulled out his phone. "Smile, ma'am." Click, another photo. Someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe she's here to give historical tours." Even the visiting civilians laughed. Evelyn picked up the rifle case without saying a word. Only Noah noticed that she gently brushed dust from one corner before lifting it, as though protecting something inside. At precisely 0800 hours, 3 Black Hawk helicopters crossed over the mountains before circling toward Falcon Ridge. Every conversation stopped. General Richard Holloway had arrived. The 4-star commander stepped onto the range wearing desert camouflage that somehow still looked pressed despite the helicopter ride. He acknowledged the salute from Colonel Ross before slowly scanning the firing line. His eyes moved across expensive rifles, competition trophies, decorated instructors. Then, they paused for less than a second on Captain Evelyn Brooks. She lowered her eyes and continued checking ammunition. The general kept walking. Colonel Ross smiled confidently. "Everything is ready, sir. It better be." Ross gestured toward the target range. 4,800 yards. General Holloway looked into the distance. The steel target was almost invisible. Only the high-powered spotting cameras made it possible to see. "The best shooters?" Ross nodded proudly. 17 elite snipers. They've all confirmed the shot? They're ready. General Holloway simply said, "Let's see." The first sniper missed. The second sniper missed. The third corrected his scope. He missed too. The wind shifted. Another miss. Someone blamed mirage. Another miss. Another. The laughter disappeared. The cameras kept rolling. Colonel Ross stopped smiling. Lieutenant Boone adjusted his gloves. "This is ridiculous." One after another, 17 of Falcon Ridge's best long-range shooters fired. 17 times, the steel target remained untouched. The desert became painfully quiet. General Holloway slowly removed his sunglasses. His voice carried across the range without effort. "Anyone?" He paused. "Still believes?" Nobody answered. Nobody moved. Except one quiet woman standing beside an old rifle case. She closed the ammunition crate, brushed one hand across the worn canvas. Then, she took one slow step toward the firing line. Then another. The movement was small, almost polite, but it pulled every eye on the range toward her. Lieutenant Travis Boone turned first, still holding his empty rifle as though the missed shot belonged to someone else. "Where do you think you're going?" Captain Evelyn Brooks didn't stop. Colonel Benjamin Ross saw her crossing the red safety line and snapped his head around. "Captain Brooks." She stopped beside the old rifle case, one hand resting lightly on the handle. "Sir." Ross walked toward her with the tight smile of a man trying not to lose control in front of cameras. "This line is closed." General Holloway asked a question. He asked shooters. Evelyn looked downrange, toward the thin, pale square trembling beyond the heat. "Yes, sir." A few men laughed again, but the sound had changed. It was smaller now, uncertain, like they were waiting for permission to mock her. "Boone gave it to them. You heard the colonel, shooters. Not supply officers with antique luggage." The media crew near the observation platform zoomed in. One journalist whispered something to another, and both smirked, already imagining the headline. A quiet logistics captain, embarrassed after trying to join an elite sniper trial, would make an easy clip if the official demonstration failed. Private Noah Ellis stood beside the ammunition table, his mouth half open, looking at Evelyn like he wanted to help but didn't know how. She didn't look back at him. General Holloway studied her from under the brim of his cap. "Captain," he said, "you believe you can make this shot?" Evelyn kept her voice level. "I believe the target can be hit, sir." Boone scoffed. "That's not what he asked." "No," Evelyn said, turning just enough to face him. "It's what matters." A short silence followed. Boone stepped closer, anger moving behind his polished confidence. "You think all 17 of us missed because we're stupid? No? Then what? You believed what the range wanted you to see." That sentence landed strangely. Not loud, not sharp, but clean enough to cut. Sergeant Cole Matthews laughed too quickly. "Well, that's adorable." He pointed at the heat shimmer rising off the desert floor. "The range wanted us to see mirage, wind drift, elevation variance, and bullet drop, because we saw all that." Evelyn nodded. "You saw pieces, and you see the whole thing?" She looked back toward the target. "No, I see the part you ignored." Colonel Ross's jaw flexed. He could feel the cameras, the general, the sponsors, the whole morning tilting out of his hands. "Captain Brooks, you are relieved from this area." "Yes, sir, that means now." Evelyn turned to General Holloway. "Permission to take one shot, sir." Ross stepped between them. "Denied." Holloway didn't look at Ross. His eyes stayed on Evelyn. "What equipment do you need?" Ross froze. Boone blinked. Evelyn opened the old rifle case. Inside lay a worn M2010, the finish faded along the stock, the metal dulled by age and use. There were no sponsor decals, no polished custom chassis, no new scope system with digital display. The sling was old leather, darkened from weather and hands. The younger recruits near the back started laughing again. One of them said, "My grandfather carried that." Another whispered, "That thing belongs in a pawn shop." Boone smiled, relieved to have something to attack. "You cannot be serious." Evelyn lifted the rifle with both hands. The laughter weakened, not because the rifle looked impressive, because she held it like it was alive. Her hand settled along the stock in exactly the right place. Her thumb checked the safety without looking. Her fingers felt the bolt, the scope mount, the barrel, not with uncertainty, but with recognition. Sergeant Matthews noticed first. His smile faded by half. Boone noticed next. The rifle no longer looked like a joke in her hands. It looked like an old language she still spoke. She set it on the table and examined the scope. One screw near the rear mount was loose. She reached into the small pocket of her uniform and removed a tiny flathead tool. Matthews frowned. "Why do you carry that?" Evelyn tightened the screw with 2 calm turns. "For loose things." Noah almost smiled, but swallowed it. Evelyn moved to the ammunition crate and looked at the rows of cartridges Boone had mocked earlier. She ignored the ones on top, opened the side row she had separated, and selected a single round. Boone snapped, "You can't just pick your own ammo." She held it between 2 fingers, turned it once in the sun, and placed it beside the rifle. "I already did." Ross pointed at the crate. "That ammunition was cleared before the demonstration. It was mislabeled before the demonstration." "Captain? Sir?" Her tone never changed, and somehow that made the confrontation worse. Holloway stepped forward. "Let her fire." Ross turned sharply. "General? With respect, this is a command demonstration. If she misses, this becomes a circus." Holloway looked across the firing line, where 17 elite snipers stood beside 17 expensive rifles and 17 failures nobody wanted to name. "Colonel, it's already a circus. I'm interested in whether anyone here still knows how to shoot." The words hit the line like a slap. Ross stepped back. Evelyn carried the old rifle toward the mat. Boone moved beside her, lowering his voice. "You missed this, and you're done on this base." She knelt and unfolded the bipod. "Was I not already?" He stared at her. She lay prone before he could answer. The entire range became still. The spotter assigned to the target hesitated, then lowered himself behind the scope. His name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Price, a quiet professional who had called 5 of the misses that morning and hated every one. He adjusted the glass toward the distant target, but Evelyn raised one hand. "No spotter." Price looked at her. "Ma'am? No call." Boone laughed under his breath. "Of course. Why use help?" Evelyn settled behind the rifle. "Because wrong help is worse than silence." Price slowly lifted his face from the scope, offended but curious. Evelyn did not touch the ballistic computer beside the mat. She did not ask for the wind meter. She did not request density, altitude, humidity, temperature, or spindrift calculations. Her eyes moved over the desert itself, from the closest dust ribbon to the broken rocks near the 3rd mile, to the shimmer bending above a shallow wash no one had mentioned. Noah watched from the ammo table, suddenly remembering how she had tapped the cartridges and heard the difference. General Holloway watched her hands. Something about the way she settled behind the rifle bothered him. Not in a bad way, in the way an old memory bothers a man when it starts knocking from the wrong side of a locked door. Evelyn breathed once. Then she lifted her head slightly and looked left of the target instead of at it. Boone whispered to Matthews, "She's aiming off the plate." Matthews didn't answer. Evelyn adjusted the elevation by less than anyone expected, then held still. The wind flags closest to the firing line drifted right. The flags at the second marker hung almost dead. A low sheet of dust near the ground moved left. The target shimmered upward in the mirage, pretending to be half a degree higher than it was. She saw the lie. Her finger rested on the trigger. Then a voice rang out behind her. "Wait!" Colonel Ross marched forward. Evelyn did not move. Ross pointed toward the rifle. "That weapon hasn't been certified for this demonstration." Holloway's eyes narrowed. "Colonel," Ross kept going, desperate now. "If command reviews this footage, it will appear we allowed an unapproved shooter, with unapproved equipment, to interfere with an official evaluation." Evelyn lifted her cheek from the stock and looked at him. "Sir, if command reviews the footage, they'll also hear you ordered mixed ammunition back into a crate." Ross went still. The range went quieter than before. Boone turned toward the ammo table. Noah looked down, then slowly raised his eyes. Captain Evelyn Brooks had not argued all morning. She had not defended herself, had not corrected insults, had not pushed back when they laughed at her rifle case. But she had seen everything, and now Colonel Ross knew it. His voice dropped. "Are you accusing me of negligence?" "No, sir." "Then what are you doing?" She settled back behind the rifle. "Taking the shot?" General Holloway raised his hand before Ross could speak. "Proceed." Evelyn closed her left eye. The world narrowed. Boone stood with his arms crossed, waiting for failure. Matthews leaned forward despite himself. Captain Lena Pierce's camera operator held the zoom tight on Evelyn's face, expecting embarrassment but capturing something else instead, something cold, disciplined, and unreachable. Evelyn's finger tightened. The rifle cracked. The shot rolled across the desert and vanished into heat. No one breathed. At 4,800 yards, a bullet did not arrive quickly. It traveled through distance, air, gravity, spin, wind, lies, and truth. It had to survive every mistake the shooter made before it ever reached the target. 1 second passed. Then 2. Then 3. The target camera shook slightly in the shimmer. Staff Sergeant Price stared through the scope. His lips parted. He didn't speak. Boone snapped, "Call it." Price leaned closer, as if the glass had betrayed him. "Call it," Ross ordered. Price swallowed. "Impact." The word was soft. Holloway stepped forward. "Where?" Price looked up slowly. "Center." The monitor team zoomed the target camera. At first the image wavered too badly for anyone to see. Then the digital stabilization locked. The steel plate filled the large screen near the observation platform, and a fresh mark appeared directly inside the faded center circle. Not on the edge, not close. Center. For the first time all morning, nobody laughed. Evelyn opened the bolt, caught the brass before it hit the dirt, and slipped it into her pocket. That tiny motion changed General Holloway's face. He had seen it before, not in person. In a classified after-action video from 12 years earlier, recorded by a drone that officially had not been over a valley, that officially had not existed in a mission report the Army still denied. A shooter on a ridge. One shot. Brass caught. No trace left behind. Holloway took one step toward her. "Captain Brooks?" Evelyn rose and set the rifle down gently. "Sir? Where did you learn to shoot like that?" She picked up the old rifle case. "Long time ago." Boone found his voice, but it came out thin. "That was luck." Evelyn turned toward him. "Then you should try it." His face tightened. The words were calm, almost kind, and somehow worse than mockery. Matthews stepped toward the monitor. "Target sensor could be off." Staff Sergeant Price glared at him. "It isn't," Ross snapped. "Check it anyway." The target crew radio crackled. "Target confirmed. Center impact." Ross grabbed the radio. "Repeat." The voice came back, clearer this time. "Confirmed. Center impact." The VIP tent erupted, not into applause, but into nervous whispers. The journalists leaned over their notepads. Defense contractors exchanged glances. Captain Pierce's camera stayed fixed on Evelyn, who seemed completely uninterested in becoming the story. Noah stared at her with wide eyes. "Ma'am?" he whispered. "Who are you?" She didn't answer, but as she closed the rifle case, the silver challenge coin slipped from her pocket and hit the mat with a small metallic sound. It rolled once, twice, then stopped at General Holloway's boot. The general looked down. The coin was worn almost smooth, but the mark at its center remained visible, a coiled hawk over a wind line. Holloway's face lost color. He bent slowly and picked it up. Noah saw the symbol. So did Staff Sergeant Price. So did Colonel Ross, though he did not understand it. Holloway did. He turned the coin in his hand, and when he spoke, his voice was lower than before. "I haven't seen this in 12 years. Evelyn held out her hand. "With respect, sir, it belongs to me." Holloway did not return it. Not yet. His eyes lifted to hers, and every person on that range seemed to feel the air shift before they knew why. "Captain Brooks," he said quietly, "why are you carrying a Ghost Meridian Challenge coin?" Boone's expression changed. Matthews stopped moving. Colonel Ross stared at the general. "Sir?" Holloway ignored him. The name had landed where only a few people understood it, but those few understood enough to go silent. Ghost Meridian was not a competition team, not a training unit, not a story for public consumption. It was a classified long-range interdiction cell buried so deep that most officers believed it had been a rumor created to scare enemies and impress young soldiers. Evelyn's hand remained open. "May I have my coin, sir?" Holloway stared at her. "Answer the question." The old rifle case rested between them. The desert wind moved dust across the firing mat. For the first time that day, Evelyn Brooks did not look like a logistics officer, or an overlooked woman, or a quiet soldier with an old rifle case. She looked like someone deciding how much truth the world deserved. And then, from the back of the observation tent, an elderly civilian consultant pushed himself to his feet, his coffee forgotten in one shaking hand. His name was Owen Briggs, retired Master Sergeant, former intelligence liaison, a man who had not spoken a single word all morning. He looked at Evelyn, then at the coin, and whispered one sentence that made General Holloway turn cold. "Sir, that's Viper Saint." Owen Briggs pushed through the stunned crowd, his cane forgotten somewhere behind him. His eyes never left Evelyn, and when he stopped 3 feet away, his weathered face looked as though 20 years had disappeared in a single heartbeat. "Sir," he repeated, barely above a whisper. "That's Viper Saint." Every conversation on the range died. Lieutenant Travis Boone frowned. "What the hell is Viper Saint?" No one answered him. General Richard Holloway slowly looked from the challenge coin in his hand to the woman standing in front of him. "You were told that name never existed." Evelyn didn't deny it. She simply held his gaze. "So were you." The sentence landed like another rifle shot. Colonel Benjamin Ross looked between them, confused. "General, what exactly is she talking about?" Holloway ignored him. His attention stayed fixed on Evelyn. 12 years ago," he said quietly, "a classified convoy crossed the Syrian border under complete radio silence. We were ambushed before sunrise. Every communications tower was destroyed. Every escape route was covered. We were outnumbered before the first minute ended." The younger soldiers stood frozen. Boone folded his arms, still unconvinced. "What does that have to do with her?" Briggs answered without taking his eyes off Evelyn. "Because there was only one sniper on that mountain." Silence. Briggs continued. "No spotter. No drone. No backup. Just one woman." Captain Lena Pierce slowly lowered her camera. Even she understood that whatever was happening now was far bigger than the demonstration she'd come to film. General Holloway looked at the old rifle case. "You still carry the same rifle?" Evelyn nodded once. "It still works." A faint smile appeared on Holloway's face. "It always did." Boone shook his head. "This doesn't prove anything." Holloway finally turned toward him. "No?" He held up the challenge coin. "Do you know what this is?" "A challenge coin." "No." The general turned it over. "This coin was presented to exactly 6 operators." He paused. 5 names are engraved on the memorial wall at Arlington." His eyes settled back on Evelyn. The 6th was erased. A long silence followed. Boone laughed awkwardly. "So she's, what, a retired sniper?" Briggs slowly shook his head. "No. She was never retired. The unit was." Private Noah Ellis stared at Evelyn. "So, you've been working logistics all this time?" She looked toward the ammunition crates. "They still need someone to count bullets." Noah smiled despite himself, then stopped, because nobody else was smiling. General Holloway stepped closer. Why? Why disappear? Evelyn looked out toward the distant steel plate, almost invisible against the desert. Because somebody had to come home. Holloway understood immediately. Briggs closed his eyes. Several of the older veterans standing behind the observation line lowered their heads. Boone looked around. What am I missing? Briggs answered softly. Every member of Ghost Meridian died during the next 3 years. They weren't supposed to exist, so they couldn't receive funerals. The words settled heavily across the range. Evelyn finally reached out. General. He placed the challenge coin back into her hand. She closed her fingers around it carefully, almost protectively. Colonel Ross finally found his voice. Captain Brooks. He stopped. The apology refused to come out. Evelyn saved him. You judged a uniform. That's all. Ross looked away. I should have checked your file. There wasn't much left to check. What do you mean? The classified portions were removed years ago. Ross swallowed. So I only saw logistics. Exactly. Boone stepped forward again. His confidence was gone. I mocked you. Yes. I laughed. Yes. He searched for the right words. They told us legends look different. Evelyn almost smiled. No. They usually don't. The media crew had stopped filming entirely. Captain Pierce quietly asked, General, can this story ever be released? Holloway looked toward Evelyn. The decision isn't mine. Every eye turned toward her. She stood silently for several seconds, then shook her head. No. The reporters looked disappointed. The people who didn't come home never got cameras. They deserved the silence. No one argued. Not even the journalists. General Holloway turned toward Colonel Ross. As of this moment, he paused. Your evaluation is over. Ross straightened instinctively. Sir? You ignored a legitimate ammunition issue. You dismissed operational observations without verification. You publicly humiliated an officer. You allowed image to replace leadership. Ross lowered his head. Yes, sir. You'll report to Corps headquarters Monday morning. He didn't ask why. He already knew. General Holloway faced the firing line. Lieutenant Boone, sir, you are one of the finest competitive shooters I've ever seen. Boone nodded carefully. But today, you spent more time judging another soldier than studying the wind. Boone looked toward the ground. That's why you missed. Yes, sir. I recommend you spend the next 6 months learning from Captain Brooks. Boone's eyes widened. He turned toward Evelyn. I'd be honored. She looked at him for a long moment, then asked quietly, Will you listen this time? Yes? No. He corrected himself. I'll try. She nodded. That's enough. Private Noah walked over carrying the old rifle case. Ma'am, you forgot this. I never forget it. She accepted the case, then looked toward him. You noticed the ammunition. I should have spoken sooner. You spoke when it mattered. His shoulders relaxed. For the first time all day, he stood a little taller. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Briggs caught up with Evelyn near her old pickup truck. I thought I'd never see that rifle again. So did I. You still catch your brass? She opened the truck door. Old habits survive longer than people. Briggs laughed softly. So do good soldiers. She placed the rifle case behind the seat. The backpack lay beside it. Still torn, still patched, still carrying the faded ranger green fabric hidden beneath its lining. Briggs noticed. You never fixed that tear. I did, she smiled faintly. Just not where anyone could see. He understood. Some things weren't meant to be displayed. They were meant to be carried. General Holloway approached one last time. I have one request. She waited. The instructors need someone to teach them how to read real wind. Evelyn looked across the endless desert, then back toward the firing line, where Boone and the other 16 snipers were already kneeling around the ammunition table, studying the mixed cartridges she had sorted before sunrise. They've already started, Holloway smiled. So they have. Evelyn climbed into the truck. The engine coughed once before starting. No escort, no ceremony, no speeches. Just an old pickup rolling slowly toward the desert road, while the newest generation of elite shooters stood watching in complete silence. Not because she demanded respect, because she'd earned it long before any of them knew her name. Maybe you've been judged before people ever had the chance to know your story. Maybe someone looked at your clothes, your age, your job, or your past, and decided what you were worth before you ever spoke a word. But the truth is, dignity has never depended on someone else's opinion. It lives in the choices you make when nobody is watching. If this story meant something to you, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And if you believe quiet courage will always outlast loud arrogance, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about hidden dignity, forgotten heroes, and ordinary people who prove everyone wrong. We'll see you in the next story.